The feeling after that game was complicated, because if you actually watched how everything unfolded, it never felt like the Warriors were outmatched or overwhelmed. For most of the night, they controlled the rhythm, they dictated the pace, and there was a sense that the energy was there on both ends of the floor. The ball was moving, the defense was engaged, and the effort level was exactly what you want to see from a team trying to reestablish consistency. The problem came late. When the minutes started to pile up, the legs got heavier, and overtime exposed something that is hard to hide in this league. Fatigue eventually catches up to you if the rotation is thin. Normally, that kind of ending would leave a sour taste, because running out of gas late in a close game often raises questions about whether a team is truly built for a deep postseason run. It is fair to think that way, especially with how demanding championship basketball becomes. But this was one of those nights where context matters, and once you look at the full picture, it becomes easier to accept the result and move forward without panic. Sometimes the opponent simply produces a performance that you cannot scheme against or outwork, and this game fell squarely into that category. Scotty Barnes delivered one of those rare nights that force you to acknowledge greatness in real time. He was everywhere, impacting the game in ways that went far beyond scoring. He finished with 23 points, pulled down 25 rebounds, and handed out 10 assists, controlling the glass, initiating offense, and punishing every defensive adjustment thrown his way. When a player puts together that type of stat line, there is no single mistake you can point to and say that is where the game was lost. That is not about breakdowns or effort. That is about a player reaching a level that very few can touch on any given night. What made it even tougher was that Barnes was not doing it alone. Toronto had multiple players stepping up, with 3 different scorers reaching the 20s, including Emmanuel Quickley and Brandon Ingram, which meant the Warriors could not simply load up on one threat and live with the consequences. Every time Golden State made a push, answered a run, or seemed ready to take full control, there was another response waiting. Those are the games where you have to take it on the chin, absorb the lesson, and refuse to let it linger longer than it should. From the Warriors' side, there were still positives worth acknowledging. Draymond Green gave them 20 points, showing an aggressive mindset that has been missing at times this season. Jimmy Butler was right there with 19, doing what he does best by creating pressure and forcing the defense to react. Stephen Curry once again flirted with 40, carrying a massive offensive load and stretching the defense well beyond its comfort zone. The concern, however, is not about production, but about usage. Curry logged 41 minutes, essentially being leaned on for nearly the entire game. And while that is sometimes necessary, it is not something you want to normalize over a long stretch. That brings the conversation back to depth and rotation choices. With several players unavailable, including Giannis Santos, Tracy Jackson-Davis, and Jonathan Kuminga, the Warriors were operating with limited options. The bench leaned heavily towards smaller lineups, and outside of Al Horford, there was a noticeable lack of size. Even so, they managed to stay competitive through 4 quarters, which speaks to their discipline and effort. The frustration comes from knowing that this approach has a ceiling, especially when overtime demands even more physicality and rebounding. There is also the absence of Pat Spencer in a game where an extra ball handler could have eased the burden on Curry. It is understandable why the coaching staff is careful with his usage, given roster mechanics and long-term considerations. But moments like this feel like missed opportunities to steal a few minutes of rest for your star. When margins are that thin, every decision is magnified, and every extra possession matters. Despite all of that, it is important to keep perspective. This was not a collapse. It was not a lack of heart. It was not a sign that the season is slipping away. It was a hard-fought game against an opponent who had a player deliver a historic night. Those games happen, even to the best teams, and dwelling on them does more harm than good. The focus has to shift quickly, especially with another matchup immediately ahead. As if the game itself was not enough to unpack, the aftermath has once again been dominated by trade speculation, particularly involving Anthony Davis. These rumors refuse to fade, and frankly, they make very little sense when you examine the details. Davis has struggled to stay on the floor, appearing in only 15 games so far this season, and availability is not a minor concern. It is the foundation of value. A talented big man who cannot consistently play is not solving Golden State's problems, no matter how impressive his resume might be. There is this idea floating around that adding size alone fixes everything, but basketball is never that simple. A big body only matters if it is actually on the court, contributing night after night. Otherwise, it becomes an expensive question mark that restricts flexibility and limits future moves. On top of that, there is the contract situation with talk of extensions and long-term money for a player who is already on the wrong side of his prime. In an era shaped by stricter caps and second apron penalties, teams are being forced to value depth, durability, and adaptability over star chasing for its own sake. The league has changed. The days of stacking massive contracts without consequence are fading fast. Front offices are rethinking how they allocate resources, and that makes the idea of sacrificing multiple rotation players and draft assets for an injury-prone star even harder to justify. Golden State cannot afford to ignore those realities, especially when the price for such a move would be steep just to make the math work. Other destinations for Davis have been floated as well, from Atlanta to Chicago, and those scenarios at least align more closely with where those franchises are in their timelines. A team like Chicago, facing an aging free agent class and looking for controlled star power, might see value in taking a calculated risk. For the Warriors, however, the fit simply is not there, and the cost would be crippling. Giving up key contributors for a player who has not proven he can stay healthy this season is a gamble that does not align with the current structure or goals. When you really break it down, the Warriors' needs are clear, but the solutions are not as flashy as some would like. They need size, yes, but they also need reliability. They need players who can defend, rebound, and finish games without constantly being managed or rested. That points more towards solid, dependable big men who understand their roles, rather than headline-grabbing names that come with significant risk. There is also the lingering conversation about other superstar possibilities around the league, particularly players who still burn with the desire to compete at the highest level. Those situations are complex, shaped by contracts, timing, and leverage, and they rarely resolve in clean or predictable ways. History has shown that the Warriors often end up in the conversation when unexpected doors open, not because they forced their way in, but because circumstances align. For now, though, all of that remains background noise compared to what is immediately in front of them. The schedule does not pause for speculation, and the next game presents an opportunity to respond the right way. Losses like the one against Toronto test a team's emotional maturity, asking whether they will dwell on what went wrong or refocus on what comes next. The encouraging part is that this group has shown resilience before, even during an uneven stretch, and there is reason to believe they can do it again. The season has been volatile, especially throughout December, with swings in form and confidence that have made it difficult to build sustained momentum. Still, stretches of solid basketball have emerged, hinting at what this team can be when effort, health, and execution align. The challenge is turning those flashes into something consistent, something that carries forward rather than resets after every setback. What happened in that game should not be dismissed, but it also should not be overanalyzed. A player had a career night. The Warriors fought, adjusted, and stayed in it until the very end. That is the reality. The real test is how they channel that experience into the next performance, how they manage minutes, how they protect their stars, and how they continue searching for answers without losing sight of who they are trying to become as the season moves forward. Coming off a game like that, the mindset inside the locker room has to be about compartmentalizing what just happened and immediately locking in on what is next. The Warriors do not have the luxury of sitting with frustration for too long, especially in a stretch of the season where every win matters for positioning and confidence. Nights like that can either drain a team emotionally or sharpen its focus, and the difference usually shows up in the very next performance. That is where the true response begins to take shape, not in words or reactions online, but in how they come out when the ball goes up again. The upcoming matchup puts that mentality to the test, because on paper it looks manageable, but those are often the most dangerous games. Teams that are reshuffling, accumulating draft assets, and experimenting with lineups still have pride, still have professional players, and still relish the chance to knock off a team with championship expectations. The Warriors have been on both sides of that equation over the years, so they understand how quickly complacency can turn into regret if the effort level slips even slightly. What makes this moment particularly important is the recent trend in their play. Over the last several games, there's been a noticeable improvement in ball movement, defensive communication, and overall energy. Even in losses, the structure has looked cleaner, and the players appear more connected than they were earlier in the month. That is not something you want to lose because of one exhausting overtime game, no matter how frustrating the ending might have been. Managing minutes becomes a central storyline again, especially with Stephen Curry shouldering such a heavy load. Asking him to consistently play over 40 minutes is not sustainable, and everyone in the organization knows that. The challenge is finding those pockets of rest without sacrificing control of the game. That is where secondary playmakers and bench contributors have to step up, not necessarily by scoring in bunches, but by stabilizing possessions and keeping the offense organized. Draymond Green's offensive aggression is another thread worth pulling on. When he looks to score, even selectively, it changes how defenses guard the Warriors. It opens lanes, creates hesitation, and prevents opponents from simply sagging off and clogging driving angles. That version of Draymond does not need to be a nightly 20-point scorer, but the willingness to attack when the opportunity is there adds a layer that this team needs, especially against lineups that try to pack the paint. Jimmy Butler's role continues to evolve as well. His presence brings a different kind of toughness, one rooted in physicality and composure rather than pace and spacing. In games where the offense stagnates, he has the ability to slow things down, draw contact, and manufacture points when the flow is broken. That skill becomes invaluable late in games, but it also has to be balanced, so the offense does not become predictable or overly dependent on isolation. Depth remains the underlying issue threading through all of these conversations. Injuries and absences have forced unconventional rotations, and while the coaching staff has done its best to adapt, there are clear limitations. Smaller lineups can survive stretches, but over the course of a full game, and especially into overtime, size and rebounding usually assert themselves. That is not a revelation, but it does reinforce the idea that internal development and eventual roster tweaks have to address that imbalance. This is why the constant swirl of trade rumors can feel both exhausting and distracting. While speculation is inevitable around a franchise with this history, not every big name aligns with the reality of what the team actually needs. Splashy moves grab attention, but they also come with opportunity costs that can linger for years. The Warriors have already experienced both sides of that equation in past eras, which makes patience and precision more important than impulse. There's also a broader league context shaping these decisions. The current cap environment has changed how contenders are built, placing a premium on versatility, health, and continuity. Teams that overextend themselves financially often find their flexibility evaporating at the exact moment they need it most. Golden State cannot afford to fall into that trap, especially with an aging core that still believes it can compete at the highest level. Before we continue, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any exclusive Dubs updates. Let's keep going. The NBA rumor mill is on fire after whispers began circulating around the league that Giannis Antetokounmpo may have privately communicated a definitive decision about his future, triggering what insiders are calling the most aggressive pursuit ever seen from the Golden State Warriors. Sources close to league executives describe the situation as an absolute bomb, one that could reshape the balance of power in professional basketball if it materializes. According to those familiar with the discussions, Giannis is no longer treating his future as an open-ended question. Behind closed doors, he is believed to have shared a clear stance with a select group of people he trusts, a move that has emboldened franchises willing to risk everything for a generational superstar. Among them, Golden State has reportedly emerged as the boldest, crafting an offer so massive and complex that rival front offices are still struggling to grasp its full scope. The speculation suggests the Warriors are prepared to sacrifice years of flexibility, young talent, and draft capital in exchange for a short window of dominance built around Giannis. The pitch is said to revolve around legacy, the chance to pair one of the most physically dominant players of his era with a franchise known for redefining modern basketball. Within league circles, the idea alone has sparked heated debate, with some executives calling it reckless and others calling it visionary. What fuels the intrigue is the silence. Neither Giannis nor the Warriors have offered public signals strong enough to confirm or deny the rumors. Yet the lack of denial has only intensified the chatter. Agents, scouts, and rival teams are reportedly operating under the assumption that something unprecedented is being explored, even if the final outcome remains uncertain. For now, it lives in the shadows of speculation, but the mere possibility has sent shockwaves through the NBA ecosystem. If the whispers hold any truth, the league may be standing on the edge of one of the most dramatic power shifts in its history, driven by a superstar's quiet decision and a franchise willing to make the biggest offer the game has ever seen. Stay updated exclusively with the latest Dub Nation news. Subscribe to our channel and hit the like button to keep getting daily updates on the Warriors. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Your input is essential for the Dubs community. Stay tuned for the next video,